The evening sun was setting behind the small town, casting a soft orange glow on the narrow streets. In a modest house at the end of the lane lived a man named David. He was in his early 40s, a quiet man with kind eyes, and every day of his life seemed to revolve around one person, his son, Ethan. Ethan was only 12 years old, but he carried a weight on his small shoulders that no child should have to bear. A year ago, an accident had changed everything. A car crash had left him paralyzed from the waist down, and since that day, Ethan's world had become limited to a wheelchair and the four walls of his room. Before the accident, Ethan was a bright, cheerful boy who loved running, climbing trees, and playing soccer in the park with his friends. He used to laugh so loudly that the neighbors could hear it, and he was always full of life. But now his days were filled with silence. The wheelchair had become his prison, and he rarely wanted to talk, laugh, or even meet the friends who once visited him. The boy who once dreamed of becoming a soccer player now sat quietly by the window, staring at the world outside as if it no longer belonged to him. David watched his son with a heavy heart. Every morning, he helped Ethan get ready, made him breakfast, and wheeled him near the window so he could at least see the outside world. But David could feel the sadness in his son's eyes. It wasn't only the physical pain. Ethan's spirit was breaking. As a father, David felt powerless. He had tried everything, from therapy sessions to new hobbies, but nothing seemed to bring the spark back. Sometimes at night, David would sit alone in the living room, his head in his hands, wondering how to save his son from drowning in hopelessness. Doctors had told David not to expect miracles. They said that Ethan's chances of walking again were very low. They encouraged therapy only to keep his muscles active and prevent his condition from worsening. But they all knew the boy's real struggle was emotional. Ethan had lost his will to fight, and no medicine could bring back the laughter he once had. David refused to give up, but every passing day felt heavier. One Saturday afternoon, David decided to take Ethan for a small ride through the neighborhood park. He thought maybe the fresh air and the sound of children playing might help, even if only for a little while. As he wheeled his son through the park, they passed a group of boys kicking a ball. Ethan's eyes followed the ball for a few seconds before he looked down at his lap, his hands tightening on the sides of his wheelchair. David noticed the quick glance and felt his heart ache. He wanted to say something encouraging, but he knew words wouldn't heal the wound. On their way back, they passed by a notice board near the park's entrance. A bright poster caught David's attention. It showed pictures of dogs, big, small, furry, and cheerful. The words above the pictures said, "Adopt a friend, give them a home." Underneath, in smaller letters, it read, "German Shepherds available for adoption. Loyal, gentle, trained, waiting for a family." David stopped for a moment, staring at the poster. Something stirred inside him. He had always loved dogs, but never had the chance to own one. Suddenly, he imagined Ethan with a dog by his side, a friend who wouldn't pity him, a friend who wouldn't care about wheelchairs, a friend who could bring back laughter without saying a single word. That evening, as Ethan sat quietly at the dinner table pushing food around his plate, David thought about the poster again. The more he imagined it, the stronger the idea became. Maybe a dog could help where he couldn't. Maybe a loyal companion could break through the silence surrounding Ethan. He decided he would visit the shelter the next day. The following morning, David woke up early, restless with hope. He told Ethan he had to run a quick errand and promised to be back soon. Ethan didn't ask where. He just nodded slightly, his eyes still fixed on the small toy car he kept on the table. David's heart broke again at the sight, but he pushed himself to stay strong. He drove across town until he reached the animal shelter. As soon as he entered, the sound of barking filled the air. Dozens of dogs wagged their tails, some jumping with excitement at the sight of a visitor. But David's eyes moved carefully from one kennel to another. He wasn't looking for just any dog. He was looking for a friend who could change his son's life. A shelter worker, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile, approached him. "Are you looking for something special?" she asked kindly. David explained about his son, how the boy was paralyzed, how lonely he felt, and how he hoped a dog could give him a reason to smile again. The woman listened quietly and then nodded. "I think I know just the dog," she said. She led David to a quiet corner where a large German shepherd sat. Unlike the others, this dog wasn't barking or jumping. He was calm, his dark eyes steady and intelligent. As David came closer, the dog stood, wagged his tail gently and looked straight into his eyes as if he understood everything. "This one's name is Max," the woman explained. "He's been through his own struggles. He was rescued from a difficult situation, but he's gentle and very protective. He has a calm nature, unlike many of the others. He doesn't need to be the center of attention, he just wants to be by someone's side." David knelt down and slowly reached out his hand. Max sniffed it, then pressed his head gently into David's palm. In that moment, David felt a connection, a silent trust. His heart told him this was the dog he had been looking for. Without hesitation, David signed the papers and brought Max home. On the drive back, the German Shepherd sat quietly in the back seat, occasionally glancing out the window. David wondered how Ethan would react. He knew his son hadn't shown interest in anything for months. What if this didn't work? But then Max leaned forward, resting his chin on the back of David's seat as if to say, "Trust me." And for the first time in weeks, David felt a little spark of hope. When they arrived home, Ethan was sitting in the living room, his wheelchair facing the window as usual. He turned his head slowly when he heard the door open. His eyes widened slightly when he saw the large German Shepherd walk in behind his father. David smiled nervously. "Ethan," he said softly. "This is Max. He's going to stay with us." Ethan looked at the dog for a long moment but said nothing. Max, sensing the boy's hesitation, walked carefully toward him, his steps slow and gentle. Then, without making a sound, he sat down beside the wheelchair and placed his head on Ethan's lap. For the first time in many months, Ethan's lips curved into the faintest smile. It was small, almost hidden, but David saw it. His chest tightened with emotion. Maybe this was the beginning. Maybe, just maybe, hope had finally walked back into their lives on four paws. The first day with Max in the house felt strange but full of quiet hope. David watched closely as his son and the German Shepherd shared the same space. Ethan had not spoken much since the accident, and even now he didn't say a word. But there was something new in the room, something different. Max didn't bark or jump around. He simply stayed close to Ethan, sitting by his wheelchair like a silent guardian. Every time Ethan looked away, Max's eyes would follow him with patience, as if he had already decided his only job was to be there for the boy. That evening, David cooked dinner while keeping an eye on them. He half expected Ethan to push the dog away or complain, but instead the boy let Max stay beside him. When David placed a plate of food on the table, Max rested his chin on the edge of Ethan's wheelchair, his tail wagging slowly. Ethan didn't laugh or speak, but he didn't tell the dog to move either. It was a small step, but to David it felt like the beginning of something big. The next morning, David woke up to the sound of soft movements in the living room. He quickly got out of bed and walked down the hallway. There he found Ethan sitting in his wheelchair looking at Max, who was lying on the floor right in front of him. Ethan was holding a small biscuit in his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, he lowered it toward the dog. Max gently took the treat from Ethan's hand, careful not to touch his fingers. For a second, David thought he saw a flicker of happiness in Ethan's face. He stayed quiet, not wanting to break the moment. Later that day, David decided to show Ethan how to interact with Max. He brought a ball from the shelf and rolled it across the floor. Max instantly ran after it, grabbed it, and brought it back. David smiled at his son. "You can try it," he said gently. Ethan hesitated, but then he picked up the ball and rolled it a short distance. Max ran again, his tail wagging happily, and dropped it right back in front of the wheelchair. Ethan's lips twitched, almost forming a smile, and his eyes followed the dog's movements with curiosity. It was the first time in months that Ethan showed interest in anything outside his window. Over the next few days, Max became part of their daily routine. He followed Ethan everywhere, sleeping near his bed at night and waiting patiently by his side during the day. When Ethan dropped a pencil while doing homework, Max picked it up gently and placed it in his hand. The boy was surprised but couldn't help whispering a soft, "Thanks." It was the first word David had heard from his son in weeks, and it filled his heart with joy. One afternoon, David wheeled Ethan outside into the backyard. The sun was warm and the air was fresh with the smell of flowers. Max ran around the yard at first, but soon came back to sit next to Ethan. Suddenly, a butterfly flew close, and Max chased it playfully, making quick turns and leaps. Ethan let out a small laugh, a sound David thought he might never hear again. He froze for a moment, listening carefully, his eyes wet with tears. That laugh was like music, like a door opening back into his son's world. But it wasn't always easy. Some days, Ethan would go back into silence, ignoring the dog and refusing to play. On those days, David felt worried again, but Max never gave up. He stayed beside Ethan without moving, sometimes placing his head gently on the boy's lap as if reminding him, "I'm here." It was that quiet patience that slowly began to break through the walls Ethan had built around his heart. One evening, as David was cleaning the kitchen, he heard a noise in the living room. When he went to check, he saw Ethan stroking Max's fur softly. Ethan didn't notice his father watching, but his face looked peaceful, almost calm. David turned away quietly, not wanting to disturb them. That night, when Ethan went to sleep, Max lay curled up on the floor near his bed. The boy reached down with effort and touched the dog's ear before closing his eyes. It was such a small gesture, but it carried more meaning than words ever could. The bond between them grew stronger each day. Ethan began talking to Max in whispers when he thought no one was listening. Sometimes he told the dog about the things he missed, playing soccer, running with his friends, or climbing trees. Other times he just sat in silence, resting his hand on Max's back. The dog never interrupted, never judged. He simply stayed and listened. David realized something important. Max was giving Ethan what he himself could not, unconditional comfort and companionship without pity. One Saturday, David suggested they all go to the park together. At first, Ethan shook his head, but Max barked once as if encouraging him. Reluctantly, Ethan agreed. When they arrived, the boy felt nervous as other kids ran past them, laughing and playing soccer. He lowered his head, feeling the same ache as before. But then Max barked again and nudged his hand, trying to pull his attention away from the crowd. David rolled the wheelchair closer to the open grass and threw a stick. Max ran after it with so much excitement that people nearby stopped to watch. When Max came running back, Ethan couldn't stop himself from smiling. For the first time, he didn't feel completely left out. Children who noticed Max came closer and asked if they could pet him. Ethan was shy at first, but Max stood proudly by his side, his tail wagging, his eyes calm. The children were gentle, and soon Ethan began to talk a little. He told them Max's name, something he hadn't done in months. David watched in silence, his heart swelling with pride. His son was slowly finding his voice again, all because of a dog's presence. The weeks turned into months, and life at home began to change. Laughter returned little by little. Ethan started waking up early, looking forward to seeing Max. He even asked his father if he could help feed the dog, something that surprised David. It wasn't just about the food. It was about responsibility, about having a purpose again. David gladly agreed and helped him hold the bowl while Max ate. One night, as David tucked Ethan into bed, the boy spoke softly. "Dad," he said, his voice uncertain, "I think Max likes me." David smiled, fighting back tears. "He doesn't just like you, Ethan, he loves you. And he's here for you, always." Ethan nodded, reaching down to touch Max's paw. The dog wagged his tail as if agreeing with every word. Still, David knew this was only the beginning. Ethan's journey was long, and there would be hard days ahead. But for the first time since the accident, he felt a light of hope shining in their lives. The boy who once lived in silence was slowly coming back, guided by the gentle loyalty of a German shepherd who refused to leave his side. And though neither of them knew it yet, Max would soon prove that his presence was not just about companionship. He would show them courage and devotion in ways that would shock everyone around them. But for now, the quiet bond between boy and dog was enough. For the first time in months, David went to bed with a smile, believing that tomorrow might hold something brighter than yesterday. The days moved slowly into early spring, and each morning seemed brighter than the last in David's small home. The presence of Max, the loyal German shepherd, had filled the house with a kind of warmth it hadn't known for months. The silence that once hung over Ethan's life was beginning to break, piece by piece. He still wasn't the same boy he used to be before the accident, but there was light in his eyes again, a spark that gave David hope. Max had become more than a pet. He was like a gentle guardian who refused to let sadness stay for too long. One Saturday morning, David noticed Ethan trying something new. The boy was sitting at the table with his notebook, his wheelchair pulled closer than usual. Max sat beside him as always, his large head resting patiently on Ethan's knee. David leaned against the doorframe and watched quietly. Ethan dropped his pencil by accident, and without saying a word, Max picked it up from the floor and placed it on his lap. Ethan giggled softly, something that felt like music to David's ears. Then Ethan whispered, "Good boy," and rubbed Max's ear. The dog closed his eyes as though enjoying every second. Moments like that were becoming more common. Ethan had started to trust Max in ways he didn't trust anyone else. Sometimes at night, David would hear his son's voice speaking softly in the dark. At first he thought Ethan was dreaming, but when he peeked in, he saw the boy whispering to Max, who listened with quiet attention. Ethan shared his fears, his memories of the accident, and even his wishes. "I wish I could walk again," David once overheard him say, his small voice trembling. "I wish I could play soccer with the kids." "Do you think I can, Max?" The dog responded by wagging his tail, pressing closer, and laying his head gently across Ethan's lap. It was as though Max was saying, "Don't give up." Encouraged by this growing bond, David decided to make their days more adventurous. He started taking both Ethan and Max on walks to the park more often. At first, Ethan felt nervous about being seen in his wheelchair, but Max's presence gave him confidence. Wherever they went, people admired the dog's discipline and loyalty. Strangers smiled at Ethan and said kind words about Max. Slowly, Ethan began to answer, his shy voice becoming stronger with each outing. One afternoon in the park, something surprising happened. A group of boys were playing soccer nearby, and one of them kicked the ball too hard. It rolled across the grass and stopped near Ethan's wheelchair. For a moment, Ethan froze. He stared at the ball, his memories of the game flooding back, memories of running freely and scoring goals. Before he could say anything, Max ran forward, nudged the ball carefully with his nose, and rolled it toward Ethan. The boys nearby clapped and cheered, amused by the dog's cleverness. Ethan laughed too, though his laugh carried a hint of sadness. David bent down beside his son. "You can still play," he said gently. Ethan shook his head, but before he could argue, Max pushed the ball again, as if insisting. Finally, Ethan placed his hands on the ball and gave it a push with his strength. It rolled back across the grass, and Max ran after it, bringing it back. For several minutes, boy and dog played their own version of soccer. Ethan laughed freely, his face glowing, while David stood silently behind him, wiping tears from his eyes. It wasn't the same as before, but it was something. It was joy returning. Back at home, David noticed even bigger changes. Ethan began taking interest in helping with Max's care. He brushed his fur with careful strokes, filled his water bowl, and even asked his father to teach him commands. Together, they trained Max to sit, stay, and fetch on command. Ethan's voice grew stronger each time he gave an order, and Max obeyed instantly. The boy's confidence was slowly rebuilding itself through the dog's loyalty. But the real turning point came one rainy afternoon. The storm outside was heavy, and thunder echoed through the sky. Ethan sat by the window, watching the raindrops race down the glass. Max lay at his feet, his ears twitching with each clap of thunder. Suddenly there was a loud crash in the backyard. The wind had knocked over a heavy trash bin. The noise startled Ethan, and his wheelchair moved slightly on the wooden floor as he flinched. David rushed from the kitchen, but Max was faster. He jumped to the side of the wheelchair, pressing against it firmly with his body until it steadied. His sharp instincts amazed David. It was almost as if Max knew his role was not only to comfort Ethan, but also to protect him. That night, as the storm calmed, David sat with his son before bedtime. Ethan reached down and hugged Max tightly, burying his face in the dog's fur. "Dad," Ethan whispered, "I feel safe when he's here." David's throat tightened, and he placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "That's because Max loves you, son. He's not just a dog, he's your friend." Ethan smiled, looking down at Max. "Maybe he's my guardian angel." The dog wagged his tail, and David felt a deep gratitude he could hardly put into words. In the weeks that followed, Max continued to amaze them. He learned to bring Ethan's blanket when the boy felt cold. He would bark gently if David didn't hear Ethan calling from his room. He even tried to push the wheelchair a little when Ethan struggled to move it over small bumps. Each act left Ethan more determined to try harder in his daily therapy. For the first time, he began to believe that maybe his life wasn't over. One sunny afternoon, David decided to take Ethan and Max to a bigger park across town. It was crowded with families, children flying kites, and joggers running along the paths. Ethan seemed shy again at first, but Max stayed close, walking proudly beside the wheelchair. As they moved along a sloped path, Ethan tried to push his chair on his own, but the wheels stuck slightly in the dirt. David was about to help, but Max stepped forward, gently pressing against the back of the chair with his body. Inch by inch, the dog helped push until the chair moved up the slope. People nearby noticed and gasped in amazement. A small crowd even clapped, impressed by the dog's intelligence. Ethan blushed, his cheeks red but his eyes shining. For once, the attention didn't embarrass him. It made him proud. He looked up at his father with a smile and said, "See, Dad? He's my teammate." David laughed, his heart full. "Yes, son. The best teammate you could ask for." That night, when they returned home, Ethan couldn't stop talking about the day. He told stories about Max's bravery and repeated the moment when people clapped for them. David listened happily, amazed at how far his boy had come. Just months ago, Ethan barely spoke or smiled. Now he was filled with excitement, and it was all because of Max. But deep inside, David knew something even bigger was coming. Max wasn't just bringing joy. He was changing their lives in ways they could never have imagined. Soon, the dog's loyalty and intelligence would lead to a moment so shocking that neither father nor son would ever forget it. For now, though, the simple bond between the boy and his German shepherd was growing stronger every day, preparing them for the test that lay ahead. The bond between Ethan and Max had become the center of their lives. Each day brought something new, something small but powerful that showed how much things had changed. Ethan now looked forward to mornings, eager to greet his loyal German shepherd, and nights were no longer filled with silence but with whispers and laughter. David often stood back, watching them, amazed at how a dog had done what no medicine or doctor could do, give his son hope again. But what none of them knew was that soon, Max would do something so extraordinary that it would shock everyone who saw it. It happened one warm afternoon at the park. The sun was shining, children were playing, and the air was filled with laughter. David had decided to take Ethan and Max out for some fresh air. Ethan wore a cap to shield his face from the sun and looked brighter than usual. Max walked proudly by his side, guiding the wheelchair with his steady presence. People in the park were beginning to recognize them. The boy in the wheelchair and the loyal German shepherd who never left his side. David pushed Ethan's chair slowly along the walking path. They passed a group of kids flying kites, then some joggers, and finally stopped near a grassy slope that led down to a small pond. Ethan liked this spot because he could watch the ducks swim lazily across the water. Max sat beside him, his ears perked up, his eyes alert as always. David stood a few steps back, enjoying the peace of the moment. But peace never lasts long when fate has something else planned. As Ethan leaned forward slightly to look at the ducks, the front wheel of his chair caught on a small rock near the edge of the slope. The ground was uneven, and before anyone could react, the wheelchair began to roll forward, down the grassy incline toward the pond. David's heart leapt into his throat. He shouted his son's name and ran forward, but he was too far away. His legs felt heavy and panic filled his chest. All he could think was, "Please, not again. Don't let me lose him." In that split second, Max sprang into action. The dog bolted toward the moving wheelchair with incredible speed. With a powerful leap, he positioned himself in front of the chair, bracing his body against it. The wheels pushed against Max's side, but the dog dug his paws into the ground, muscles straining. The slope was steep and the weight of the chair was strong, but Max refused to move. With all his strength, he held his ground, barking loudly to alert everyone around. People in the park gasped and froze as they watched the scene unfold. Some rushed forward, but Max had already stopped the chair from sliding further. Within seconds, David reached them, his chest burning, his breath short. He grabbed the handles of the chair and pulled it back up the slope with trembling hands. Ethan's face was pale, his eyes wide with shock, but he was safe. Safe because Max had refused to let him go. For a long moment, there was silence. David sank to his knees beside the dog, his arms around both Ethan and Max. His whole body shook with relief, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you, boy," he whispered into Max's fur. "You saved him." Around them, people who had witnessed the moment began clapping. Some took pictures, others wiped their eyes, amazed at the bravery they had just seen. Ethan looked down at Max, who sat calmly as if nothing unusual had happened. The boy reached out with trembling hands and hugged the dog tightly. For the first time, his voice was loud and clear, echoing in the park. "You're my hero, Max." His words brought another round of applause from the crowd. David felt his chest swell with pride and gratitude, not just for the dog, but for the change in his son. That moment had shaken Ethan out of his fear, showing him that he wasn't helpless, not as long as Max was by his side. The news of the event spread quickly. Someone had recorded the whole thing on their phone, and by the next day the video was shared online. People all over town and even far beyond watched in awe as the German Shepherd saved the boy in the wheelchair. Messages of admiration poured in, and neighbors came to congratulate David and Ethan. Everyone called Max a hero, but for the family he was much more. He was a miracle. At home, Ethan's transformation became even more visible. The fear that had held him back seemed to loosen its grip. He began to push himself harder in therapy, motivated by the thought that if Max could fight with such strength, then he should try too. When his therapist asked him to attempt standing with support, Ethan didn't refuse this time. He placed his hands on the parallel bars, took a deep breath, and tried. His legs trembled, his arms shook, but he did it. He stood, even if only for a few seconds. Max barked joyfully, running circles around him, and Ethan laughed through tears. David watched every step of his son's progress with a heart full of emotion. Sometimes he wondered if this was fate, if Max had been sent to them for a reason. The boy who once avoided people now looked forward to walks in the park, proudly introducing his dog to strangers. The child who once cried silently at night now dreamed of walking again, his determination fueled by the loyalty of his four-legged friend. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Ethan spoke words that left David silent for a moment. "Dad," he said softly, stroking Max's fur, "I don't feel broken anymore. Even if I can't walk, I'm not alone. Max makes me feel strong." David swallowed the lump in his throat and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You are strong, Ethan, and Max is here to remind you of that every single day." Max seemed to understand the weight of the conversation. He pressed his nose gently against Ethan's hand, wagging his tail slowly. The boy smiled, leaning closer to whisper, "You saved me twice, Max. First from sadness and then from danger. You're more than a dog. You're my best friend." The family's story soon reached local newspapers, and a journalist came to interview them. David was nervous, but Ethan spoke with surprising confidence. He told them about the accident, about how he felt like life was over, and how Max changed everything. His words touched everyone who listened. The article was published under the headline, "German Shepherd Saves Boy, Teaches Family the True Meaning of Hope." People began sending letters, gifts, and even offers of training for Max. But David knew they didn't need anything more. They already had what mattered most, a bond that could never be broken. Still, he accepted the offers of therapy support for Ethan, knowing it would help his son grow stronger. As days turned into weeks, Ethan's progress continued. With Max by his side, he dared to try new things. He played catch in the yard, helped with chores from his wheelchair, and even began sketching pictures of himself and Max as superheroes. Each drawing showed Ethan standing tall with Max beside him, a cape flowing behind them. David kept those drawings safe, knowing they symbolized his son's return to hope. But no drawing could compare to the real image etched in David's mind, the moment Max stopped that wheelchair from rolling into danger. It was a picture of bravery, love, and unbreakable loyalty. It was the moment he realized that sometimes the miracles we pray for don't come through medicine or doctors, but through the silent devotion of a friend who speaks only through actions. That shocking moment at the park had not only saved Ethan's life, it had given him the courage to believe again. And for David, it was proof that adopting Max was the best decision he had ever made. The weeks after the park incident passed with a new rhythm in David and Ethan's home. The story of Max's bravery had spread quickly, but for the father and son, it wasn't about fame or headlines. It was about the changes happening inside their small house, the kind of changes no one outside could ever fully understand. For the first time since the accident, laughter returned like a familiar song, and each day felt like a new chance rather than another reminder of loss. Ethan woke up early most mornings now, excited to see Max waiting by his bed. The dog's tail would thump against the floor as soon as the boy's eyes opened. Ethan had started calling Max his alarm clock because he never let him sleep too long. "He wants me to get up," Ethan said with a grin, and David could only smile. A year ago, his son didn't want to face the day at all. Now a dog's wagging tail was enough to push him forward. Therapy sessions, which once felt like heavy punishments, became challenges Ethan wanted to tackle. Max attended every session, lying nearby as the boy worked on his exercises. When Ethan tried to lift himself from the wheelchair using the parallel bars, Max would bark softly as if cheering him on. The therapists noticed the difference immediately. They told David that Ethan's progress was faster than expected, and they believed it was because of the emotional strength the boy had gained. Hope was stronger than any medicine, and Max had given it back to him. One special afternoon, Ethan managed to take 3 small steps with support. His legs shook and sweat rolled down his forehead, but he did it. Max barked loudly, wagging his tail, and ran in circles as if celebrating. Ethan laughed and cried at the same time, reaching down to hug his furry friend. "I couldn't have done it without you," he whispered. David stood nearby, clapping through tears. He would never forget that moment. The sight of his son standing again, the joy on his face, the proud bark of the dog who had made it all possible. At home, Ethan began to take on small responsibilities that once seemed impossible. He asked David if he could help feed Max, brush his fur, and even fill his water bowl. Each task made him feel useful again. No longer just a boy in a chair, but a boy with a purpose. David noticed how much this change meant to his son. The boy who once saw himself as broken now saw himself as someone important, because Max depended on him too. The bond between them grew deeper with every passing day. Ethan began to draw pictures of their adventures together. In one drawing, he sketched himself sitting in a wheelchair, holding a ball, while Max stood proudly beside him. In another, he drew himself standing tall with Max by his side, both of them wearing superhero capes. David kept every picture in a folder, knowing they were more than drawings. They were signs of healing, proof that his son's spirit had returned. Life outside their home also changed. When David and Ethan went to the park now, people greeted them warmly. Children ran over to pet Max, and parents praised the dog's loyalty. Ethan no longer looked away when people approached. Instead, he introduced Max proudly, answering questions and even sharing small stories. He once told a group of kids, "He saved my life," and his voice carried so much confidence that David's eyes filled with tears. One afternoon, the local community center invited Ethan and David to share their story at a small event. At first, Ethan hesitated, shy about speaking in front of people. But with Max at his side, he agreed. On the day of the event, the hall was filled with families, children, and even the therapist who had been working with him. Ethan sat in his wheelchair on stage, Max lying calmly at his feet while David introduced their journey. Then Ethan took the microphone. His voice was soft at first, but grew stronger as he spoke. He told them about the accident, about the darkness that had filled his days, and about how Max had changed everything. "I thought my life was over," he said, looking down at his dog. "But then I realized I wasn't alone. Max showed me I can still be happy, I can still dream, and I can still fight." The audience gave him a standing ovation, and Max barked once as if accepting the applause for himself too. That evening, as they drove home, Ethan leaned against Max in the back seat. "Dad," he said softly, "I want to keep trying. I want to get stronger so I can walk beside Max one day." David's hands tightened on the steering wheel and his voice broke when he replied, "You already make me proud, son. Whether you walk or not, you've already won." But deep inside, David believed more than ever that his son would do it. He had seen the determination in his eyes, the strength that had returned to his heart, and the way Max pushed him forward every day. If anyone could overcome the impossible, it was Ethan, with Max beside him. Seasons changed and life settled into a new normal. On warm evenings, David often sat on the porch watching Ethan and Max play their own version of soccer in the yard. The boy would push the ball and Max would chase it, always bringing it back with a proud wag of his tail. Laughter filled the air, the kind of laughter David thought he would never hear again. It was a sound that reminded him of the old days before the accident. But now it was even sweeter because it had been born out of struggle and courage. One night, as David tucked Ethan into bed, the boy said something that stayed in his heart forever. "Dad," he whispered, resting his hand on Max's back, "I used to think I was unlucky, but now I think I'm the luckiest boy in the world, because I have you and Max." David kissed his forehead, his eyes wet with tears. "No, son," he said softly, "I'm the lucky one, because I get to see you smile again." Max wagged his tail as though agreeing with every word. He curled up on the floor beside Ethan's bed, his eyes closing slowly. David stood at the door looking at his son and the loyal dog and felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The future was still uncertain, but it no longer scared him. With Max in their lives, he believed anything was possible. The story of David, Ethan, and Max continued quietly, without the cameras or the headlines. It was told in the way Ethan pushed himself to stand a little longer each day. It was told in the way Max barked proudly whenever he succeeded, and it was told in the way David's heart swelled with gratitude every time he saw his son smile. Max had not just been a pet. He had been a healer, a protector, a teacher, and above all, a friend. He had reminded them both that life was not measured by what you lost, but by what you still had the courage to fight for. And as long as Ethan had Max by his side, there was nothing that could steal his hope again. The nights in their small home were peaceful now. Sometimes David would hear Ethan whispering softly into the dark, talking to his loyal friend, words of dreams, words of thanks, and sometimes just simple words of love. And every morning when the boy woke up to see Max waiting by his bed, he was reminded again that miracles didn't always come in grand ways. Sometimes they came on 4 legs with wagging tails and loyal eyes. For Ethan, Max was more than a hero. He was proof that even after the darkest days, life could surprise you with light. And for David, watching his son hug that dog every night, he knew one thing for certain. He hadn't just adopted a German shepherd. He had brought home the guardian angel his son had been waiting for.